Chapter 5. But it was not to be. Days turned into weeks, and still there were no missions for the Star Darlings. Sage fell into a routine of classes, clubs, and regular calls home. She joined the Hollow Book Club, at Cassie's request, and the Explorers Club, which met every Reliqua Day. She took her first hike to the Crystal Mountains, which were just as spectacular as she had imagined. And she finally read the student manual from start to finish, much to Cassie's and Gran's relief. In her classes, Sage learned a lot about wishlings and stars apps, and wish identification. But Sage could never fully relax, knowing that she could be summoned for her mission to Wishworld at any moment. Some of the other Star Darlings seemed keyed up as well. There was a wide range of emotions running through the group, as some of them just couldn't wait to get going, and others were a bit more reluctant. Some pretended to be blasé, even though they were nervous, but Cassie made it no secret that she was in no rush to head for Wishworld anytime soon. Lady Stella put on a brave face. "Everything is going as planned," she said often. "Your missions could start at any moment. Be ready." But Sage had spotted the Wish Watcher who was in charge of the Star Darlings' wish orbs coming out of Lady Stella's office the past week, looking very worried indeed. Sage enjoyed wishful thinking class most of all. Although she had not yet had her turn to showcase her talents, it was fascinating to see the different skill levels of the students. One day she arrived in class early to find that she and Vivica were the only ones there. Sage quickly sat down and started fiddling with her stars app. The next thing she knew, Sage looked up to discover Vivica leaning on her desk. She jumped. "So, how's everything going, Sage?" Vivica asked. "Just fine," replied Sage guardedly. "Glad to hear it. I'd hate to hear that you were overwhelmed or anything." "I'm fine," said Sage. "Thanks for asking." When she had been in Wee Constellation School, there had been a boy in her class who picked on everyone smaller than him. When Sage had gone home crying because he had said she smelled like stinkberries, her mom had assured her she smelled lovely, and then taught her how to deal with bullies, by simply ignoring them. It had worked with that boy, and Sage hoped it would work now. "Bullies want to get a reaction out of you," Indira had told her. "It makes them feel powerful. Don't give him the satisfaction." Some other girls came into the classroom, and then Vivica had an audience. She smiled a mean smile. "So, how is your study group going?" she asked in a loud voice for the other girls' benefit. "Did you all know that Sage and her roommate are in an extra class?" The other girls didn't say anything, but a couple looked intrigued. Sage shifted in her seat. "Makes you wonder why she would be accepted into such a prestigious academy," Vivica continued. "Makes you wonder if she had some help getting in. Like, maybe someone's well-known scientist mother pulled some strings and got her daughter into school." "That's not true!" shouted Sage. Starf! She hadn't meant to let the mean girl get to her. Professor Dolores Ray walked into the classroom at that very moment, of course. "Sage," she scolded. "No shouting in the classroom, please." Sage scowled and sunk in her seat, till her head was barely at desk level. Great. Now her favorite professor was mad at her. Sage was angry. And maybe, just maybe, the reason she was so angry was that she herself feared that there was some truth to what Vivica had said. She had been pleasantly surprised when she had been accepted to Starling Academy. Could that be the real reason she had been accepted? Was she an imposter? After SD class that day, Sage was on her way back to her room when she spotted a dapper-looking gentleman chatting with a bot guard on the Little Dipper dormitory steps. "This is Cassie's roommate, Sage," the bot guard informed the man as she approached. "Star salutations," the man said to the guard. He turned to Sage and bowed. "Hello, Sage. I am Andreas. I'm here to see Cassie." "She stopped to drop off some hollow books at the library," explained Sage. She looked up and noticed he had the same soft burgundy eyes as her roommate. She smiled. "You must be her father," she cried. "It is so nice to finally meet you. Cassie is a great roommate. She even got me to join the Hollow Book Club." She looked around. "Hey, is her mom here? I can't wait to meet her, too." Andreas looked confused. "No, I am Cassie's uncle." He frowned and leaned forward. "You do know that Cassie's parents have completed their cycle of life, don't you?" he said in a low voice. "Back when she was 6 years old. She has lived with me ever since. I am her guardian, her mother's older brother." Sage stared. "You mean they have begun their afterglow?" she said. "But Cassie..." Suddenly, she realized that the hollow pictures displayed in their room were of a much younger Cassie and her parents. And she recalled how Cassie often stared into the heavens before bed. She had assumed her roommate had been on the lookout for shooting stars, but now she realized she must have been staring at her parents' stars. She felt a sudden stab of sorrow. Poor Cassie. "Oh, there she is," her uncle said, a smile on his face. "Cassie!" He waved and began heading over to her. Cassie's mouth opened into an O of surprise. She ran to her uncle, her arms outstretched. Sage decided the kindest thing to do was slip away without Cassie seeing her. She headed in the other direction. She'd hang out in the Lightning Lounge until dinner time to give her roommate some space. Sage returned to the room as Cassie was drawing the curtains shut. "Sorry I didn't make it to dinner tonight," Cassie said. "My uncle Andreas came for a visit, and he took me out to eat. My, parents were busy, so he came instead." "Cassie," said Sage slowly, "I, met your uncle. He told me that your parents were..." Cassie opened a drawer and was suddenly very busy picking out a pair of pajamas. "Oh," she said. "Oh, I see. Okay. If you want to talk about it, we can." Cassie quickly got changed and slid into bed. "No, it's okay. Good night." She slipped her headphones onto her ears and turned to face the wall. Sage put on her own headphones and tried to fall asleep. But she couldn't. She felt terribly sad for Cassie, and also awkward. She lay awake, watching the shadows on the wall. She was sure Cassie was awake, too. When Sage woke up the next morning, the room was empty. Cassie's bed was perfectly made. Suddenly, Sage's stars app lit up. A hollow text appeared. "Dear Sage," it read. "I'm sorry I lied to you about my parents. I'm actually not even sure why I did it. I guess it's just that when you assumed they were around and talked about them like they were alive, it felt really good to go along with it. It was easy to pretend that we were apart because I was at school, and not because they had begun their afterglow. I liked pretending that they were still at home waiting for me. I'm sorry for lying to you, and I'm really embarrassed too. Your roommate, Cassie. P.S. I'd appreciate it if we never talked about this again." "Dear Cassie," Sage wrote back after much thought. "No need to ever apologize to me. I'm the one who is sorry. I promise I'll never bring it up again. Love, Sage. Now that the truth was out there, Sage learned a lot more about Cassie's life. Her uncle was a best-selling author who sold mooniums of hollow books a year. Sage's dad was a big fan of his mysteries. He traveled Starland extensively on book tours, and Cassie often accompanied him on his trips. If she didn't feel like going, she stayed at home, in a large mansion, with their housekeeper, Marta, a sweet older woman who was as close to Cassie as if she were her grandmother. "No wonder you love books so much," Sage said. She was delighted to learn that Cassie was also a recurring character in the series, as a brilliant young sleuth who often assisted the main character on cases. Now that Cassie's secret was out in the open, the two girls fell into an easy friendship. Then one day, everything changed. It was finally Sage's turn in wishful thinking, and she was very excited. She stood in front of the class. This time, there was a pitcher of glorange juice and an empty glass on Professor Dolores Ray's desk. The teacher called her name, and Sage walked to the front of the room. "Okay, Sage, time to show us what you've got," said Professor Dolores Ray. "Here goes nothing," said Vivica under her breath. The meaner girls in the class giggled. Sage smiled. Now she would show everyone who was supposed to be at Starling Academy. She stared at the glass, and it slid gracefully across the table. "Well done, Sage," said Professor Dolores Ray with a broad grin. For her next trick, Sage decided she would levitate the pitcher and pour the teacher a glass of juice. Sage was an expert at wish energy manipulation. She had been practically since birth. As a baby, she had shocked her parents by levitating a toy across the room and floating it into her chubby little hand. She had been crying for it, and they hadn't been able to understand what she wanted. So she simply concentrated on it, and there it was. This energy had also come in handy while she was learning how to glimmer skate. It had kept her from falling over. But just as she was lifting the glass, her star zap vibrated. Probably just a hollow text from Gran, she thought. She stole a glance at it. "SD Wish Orb identified," she read. "Proceed to Lady Stella's office immediately." Crash! The pitcher fell to the floor and shattered. There were glass shards and glowing orange juice all over the floor. Then it was instantly gone. "That was a good try, Sage," said the professor sympathetically. Several girls laughed, and Vivica shook her head. But Sage didn't even notice. Her heart was fairly leaping out of her chest with excitement. She grabbed her star zap and asked to be excused. Sage walked down the hall quickly, her heels clicking on the marble floor. A classroom door opened, and Scarlet came out. She spoke to Sage for the first time ever. "It's happening," she said, her black eyes shining. "It is really happening. Right here. Right now." The two girls grinned at each other and ran down the hall toward the headmistress's office. Once again, the girls sat around the table in Lady Stella's office. Cassie looked even paler than usual. "I can't believe this is actually happening so soon," she whispered to Sage. "So soon?" thought Sage. It felt like it had taken forever. The door opened and Lady Stella strode inside. She looked energized and, Sage noted, slightly nervous. She stood in front of the girls and clasped her hands together. "This is it, Star Darlings. The moment we have all been waiting for. A Star Darling's wish orb has been identified by our wish watcher. It is time for us to head to the Star Darling's wish cavern to find out who the wish belongs to. Let's go underground." Underground? The girls looked at each other in confusion. Deep underneath Halo Hall, is a labyrinth of underground caves, Lady Stella explained. They are secret, known only to a few members of the faculty, and now you. We decided to build your special wish cavern there to keep its existence secret from prying eyes. Lady Stella walked to her desk and opened a drawer. She reached inside, and a hidden door in the back wall slid open. Sage was one of the first through the doorway and found herself descending a circular stairway. There was a sudden change in temperature, and the air grew musty and damp. Sage shivered. The girls walked in silence, the only sound the echoing clatter of their footsteps on the metal stairs. Suddenly, someone started to sing. She sang softly at first, then the song grew louder. It was a pretty tune about stars twinkling in the darkness, and the voice was clear and sweet. Sage thought it might be Leona. Finally, they reached the bottom of the steps, and the singing stopped. The only light came from the glowing rocks set in the dripping walls of the cavernous room they stood in. "Welcome to the Star Caves," Lady Stella said, her voice echoing. "We will head to the Wish House in a moment, but first, I want you to experience just how complete the darkness is down here. Are you ready?" "Yes," said several voices. Sage thought she recognized Leona's as the loudest. Lady Stella closed her eyes, and all the lights were suddenly extinguished. It was so utterly dark that Sage held up her hand and couldn't see it. Sage felt a small, cold hand grab hers, and knew instantly it was Cassie's. Sage squeezed her hand, for her own comfort as much as her roommates'. Just then, the star on the middle of Lady Stella's forehead began to glow, illuminating her lovely face. After a moment, the lights turned back on again, to everyone's relief. "Follow me," Lady Stella said. "The Wish Cavern is ready for us." Sage worked her way through the crowd, so she was right behind the headmistress. She shivered in the damp air. She wished she had worn a sweater. A big, cold drop of water hit her squarely on the shoulder. In the spooky half-gloom, she could see rocky formations rising from the floor and dripping down from the ceiling like stone icicles. A sudden squeaking sound made her jump. "Don't worry," said Lady Stella. "It's just a bit bat. They don't bite. Unless they're hungry." Sage nervously laughed along with the other girls. She hoped the headmistress was kidding, but she wasn't quite sure. "Ah, here we are," said Lady Stella, stopping in front of what looked like a sheer stone wall. She concentrated, and a section of the wall slid open. A secret entrance. To Sage's amazement, bright sunlight flooded out. The girls pushed inside, eager to be out of the damp gloom. "Welcome to the Star Darlings' Wish Cavern," Lady Stella said. "This magical place has been created just for you and your wish missions." Though they were deep underneath Starling Academy, the girls found themselves in a working wish house, the sun streaming in through the glass roof. Golden waterfalls of pure wish energy streamed down the sides. Sage smiled as she felt the immediate effects of the positive energy. There was grass underneath their feet and a row of wish orbs, their sparkly forms bobbing. Sage counted them quickly. 11. She noticed that Astra had kicked off her shoes and was scrunching her toes in the velvety-looking grass. The girls gravitated toward a grass-covered platform in the middle of the garden and stood around it uncertainly. Sage stood between Clover and Gemma, who both looked excited, and across from Cassie, who was much more reserved. Lady Stella then announced, One of 12 wish orbs is glowing, which means that a wish is ready to be granted. It is the perfect match for one of you. The timing is wonderful, as your studies have progressed enough that you are all ready to make the trip to Wish World. Now, the wish orb will choose which of you is the best match for its wish. The headmistress pointed to the platform. Are you ready? The girls nodded. Lady Stella clapped her hands. The room darkened, and a beam of light appeared and focused on the middle of the round platform. As the girls watched, the center of the platform opened, and up popped a single wish orb. It floated in the air. As the girls watched, it slowly moved to the edge of the platform and began to circle around, pausing momentarily in front of each star darling, as if deciding which girl it belonged to. Sage stared at it, hoping that it belonged to her. She closed her eyes. Me, me, me. Please be me, me. When she opened her eyes, the orb was floating in front of her. Lady Stella reached out and plucked the wish orb out of the air. She turned to Sage, her eyes brimming with tears. This is a historic moment, she said. The very first star darling has been chosen. The wish orb belongs to you, Sage. Was it Sage's imagination, or did the headmistress look relieved? Sage could hardly breathe. It's really me? She finally managed to squeak out. It's really you, said Lady Stella. Congratulations, Sage. Now, it is time to prepare for your wish mission. The headmistress clapped her hands again. When we get upstairs, the rest of you girls are dismissed. Sage, you come with me. We have a lot to do before you leave. By tomorrow morning, you will be on your way to helping Wish World.